I'm Rowan from Wild Rumpus, from Macclesfield. We're an arts organisation who deliver high-quality, large-scale outdoor arts events for families. Our flagship event is called the Just So Festival. Takes place just about 20 minutes away, just outside Congleton at Road Hall. If you had asked me 9 years ago, had said to me 9 years ago that I would be sitting on a panel talking about anything digital, I would have said you were mad, because one of the motivations that we had for going into Just So when we first set up 9 years ago was to take a family audience out of their digital day-to-day lives, away from their devices, and take them somewhere analogue. And so it's all about, we work from a woodland, it's all about being out in nature. It felt, and for quite a long time when we were programming, we veered away from digital arts. We didn't program things that had to be plugged in wherever we could avoid it. But as time's gone on, as our work has deepened and developed, we've kind of realised that actually what we're doing is telling stories. We are storytellers. And one of the things we're most interested in is how to deepen the engagement our audience has with our stories, and digital is one of the most exciting ways that we can do that. We have now used a kind of broad range of different digital techniques to do this. We do podcasts, animations, all kinds of different ways that we can think about to engage our audiences in a story so that they're familiar with a character, with a narrative. By the time they walk in our doors to one of our events, they're already engaged and invested in what's happening. And it has such an incredible impact, which is no surprise, really. I mean, I guess we all know if you go to a gig and it's a band where you know that music, you have a much deeper, more exciting experience than if you just stumble in off the street and it's that same kind of thing. So I think we find digital most exciting in the opportunity it gives us to deepen that engagement the audience has with our stories. And then on a more kind of initially logistical side of things, we use digital. We've just invested in some data tracking for our events, so we can use heat mapping to see how audiences move around events, so we can program in a way that is more kind of matching to their experience and what they need. We do lots of CRM, looking at kind of what different audience members, how they engage with us. Do they come to all of our events? Do they just come to one? And what we're interested in doing next is looking at how actually those things could work together and we can deepen an individual kind of, I want to say audience member, like one of our Wild Rumpus family. We can engage people in a more kind of targeted way, so that actually we're looking at how we can program in such a way that it deepens the experience from their physical interaction as well as their kind of creative interaction, if that makes any sense. I'm going to hand it over to Ruth.
Hello. Hi, so my name's Ruth McCullough. I work for Abandoned Normal Devices. So we're an arts organisation based here in the Northwest that works across new cinema, digital culture and art. And the programme aims to sort of challenge audiences and artists and our partners to think digitally how science, emerging technology can be used in an arts context. So I do have some images, I think, from projects that we've done. Great. So in terms of our programme, we run a festival that happens every 2 years in a different location, and then we also programme sort of a range of commissions and research that happen on a year-to-year basis. And we work across art forms, so the experiences that people might have would be film happenings, performances, a lot of artworks that are experienced in the public realm or in site-specific ways. This is yours, Ronan, I think. So this is Just So Festival.
Yeah. This is Wild Rumpus events.
I can't make claim to these images. And yeah, we work with a range of different partners from across arts and heritage to universities and technology and science partners. So the programme's quite diverse. This is... I'm going to talk about a couple of projects very, very quickly, which will hopefully spark a discussion about digital and audiences. I think one of the things we have in common with Just So is just the idea of, site specificity and how we work with technology. And we try and think about the festival, even though we work with technology, that the digital or the screen isn't the first thing that sort of we engage audiences with, and try and think about that audience experience in a more expanded sense. So yes, I'll chat about Cosmos quickly first. So this was a project that we launched last year in partnership with Jodrell Bank, Blue Dot Festival and Shift, working with Arup, also an engineering company. So it was the development of a residency at Jodrell Bank, working with the astrophysicists there to develop an audiovisual commission that was then projected onto the telescope during the Blue Dot Festival in July. So the program's been in development for a couple of years, but last year we launched it with a Japanese artist called Daito Manabe and the Rhizomatics Research Institute. And they worked with the astrophysicists looking at the different data streams that come from the telescope and developed this interaction unit that you can see at the sort of bottom of the picture. So audiences had a mixture of data sets that they could look at, and it impacted what they were seeing on the telescope. And we had a range of sort of scientists and people there sort of talking to audiences about that so they could see their impact on that in real time. Yeah, and downstairs we worked with Arup, who are an engineering company, and they LiDAR scanned the telescope, which is a data scan which we use to sort of projection map really specifically onto the structure, because it was in this position rather than the flat-facing, forward-facing structure. So downstairs they've now taken that scan and made it into a virtual reality experience, so you can explore the telescope through virtual reality. I'm going to quickly whiz through a couple of projects which I think sort of embody some of the digital and site-specific elements that we're going to talk about. So this is In the Eyes of the Animal, which was a virtual reality experience that we commissioned in 2015 with the Forestry Commission, that you experienced in the forest. So these people have these beautifully sculptured headsets, and inside there is a VR headset. An audience took a journey through the forest through the eyes of 4 different species, through the sort of ecosystem of the forest. So they worked with scientists and some of the Forestry Commission staff to think about how those different species perceive the world around them, from things like a dragonfly, and then you become a frog, and then you become an owl. So looking at their perception and how you could convey that in an artistic sense. So this is some of the visuals from When You're a Migi in it. Am I doing for time? I don't want to take up too much. And this is another virtual reality work that we commissioned last year. The festival took place in the Peak District in Castleton, where there's lots of underground and cavern spaces. So there was work underground in those spaces, but we also had things in the landscape. And this virtual reality work, which was a journey through the underground. And participants put on these costumes, and it was a group experience, so you could see other people within the virtual reality world. It was very playful and performative. You basically ate your way through the layers of the earth. So there was a mouthpiece that worked with the virtual reality headset that sort of triggered different parts of the game, and you could play with the other people within that. So these are some of the visuals from the middle of it. I think I don't want to run over time-wise, so will I hand over to you?
I've only got one slide. Okay. Afternoon, everybody. I've only got one slide with one photograph, so it'll be quite quick. So I approach this from a slightly different angle. I'm the managing director of an agency called Sigma. We're a stone's throw away in Macclesfield, so I am a Macclesfield employer. We are a user experience-focused digital agency, and by that I mean we design and build things at the more traditional end of digital. So a lot of the wonderful, exciting things you've seen today, we don't do that. We design systems, so websites, apps, portals, online information systems, the kind of things that we use every day in our work and our play. Inclusion is a really big part of what we do at Sigma, and by that I mean designing things so that we reach the broadest possible audience. I think a couple of the talks have touched on that today. We know that in the UK there are more than 13 million disabled people, 7% children, I think it's about 18% working age adults, and there are 3 million disabled people in employment in the UK. So when we're talking about designing things, we do it in a way to try and reach the broadest possible audience and make it an inclusive experience. Thinking about how people might be impaired or disabled by their environment or their workplace or society, sadly. So we look at impairments including sensory, so whether sight or hearing impairments, or physical, cognitive. It might be a temporary short-term condition, or it might be a long-term, lifelong situation that somebody's in. And we take all of that into consideration when we design things. Beyond that, there's also digital confidence. We talked a little bit before about, digital being here and it's great and we can use it, and isn't there all this wonderful innovation? Well, sadly, 1 in 5 in the UK are lacking in the basic digital skills they need to take part in some of the things that we possibly or probably all use daily. So again, we think about different contexts and different behaviour with digital interfaces and different ways people will interact. I'm really interested, therefore, in how we take some of this more exploratory work, the wonderful projects that are looking at how people engage beyond screens, how people can immerse themselves into situations that physically they'll never be in. I'm really interested in how we can learn from that and take it into traditional system design. Because quite often art's over here and very shiny and funded for individual projects, but it might not scale, or it might not be something that we can take into mainstream. I think Catherine talked about that beautifully just before we broke. How can we take the wonderful innovation that we have and make it reach a much broader group of people? So my angle, I guess, is slightly different. I only have a couple of things to show from our work in that space. One is our own use of VR, where I think it's already on the screen. We have developed a VR headset tool that allows people to just understand what sight loss is like. So it's not a particularly immersive experience. I wouldn't say that it teaches real understanding. You can't pop that on for 5 minutes and really understand what it means to suffer a visual impairment. But for designers and developers working in system design, it gives them a feel for, there's an audience here I haven't thought about. It makes them think beyond screen, how they can, design, being mindful of environment and light and colour and contrast and wayfinding. So that's one piece of VR technology that we're trialling now. And on the right side, a very traditional analogue project. We did some research called Digital Diaries, where we asked local residents in Cheshire East to just track their engagement with the internet. So people who came to us for digital skills training mapped out over 3 months what that experience was like, when they felt that they would use the internet, when they definitely didn't want to use the internet, what they loved, what they hated. So that's a couple of examples for maybe the more traditional world. Okay.
Thank you. It's interesting you were talking about making sure that technologies were accessible to the widest audience. We've done some work looking at how we can use digital technologies to make sure that our stories and our events are as accessible to the widest audience. We had some funding from the Paul Hamlin Foundation looking at, it was specific to an event called the Lost Carnival, which had a kind of quite complicated backstory about this lost carnival family. And then when people arrived at the event, the more they understood that story, the better engagement they would have. And we looked at lots of different technologies we could use beforehand to make sure that people who did have specific access issues could access the story in different ways. That kind of went from completely non-digital ideas like story boxes that got delivered in a mysterious fashion to people's doorsteps, right through to kind of audio programs and different kind of visual stories, that are different ways we could tell things. I think it kind of maybe works both ways. I had one quick question I wanted to ask these guys, and then I'll see if there's any questions on the floor, which was just where you thought the sweet spot lay for an audience between the real and the digital world.
That's quite a tough one. But I think for us, and there's like different scales of experience of that sweet spot. So there's large scale events that we do that enable lots of people to come together and experience something and see that site in a different way. And then there's the smaller events like the VR experiences, or, where you have a limited audience numbers, where people, get a more intense, sort of intimate experience with that technology. I think for us is helping that sweet spot happen is thinking a lot about the audience access, and not just sort of physical access, but also how they come to that piece of work or that story, and spending quite a bit of time thinking about that, so we can get them to a place where, they connect with what we're trying to do, whether that's the site or the artwork on a deeper level. For example, with the Eyes of the Animal, when it was in the forest, we spent a lot of time with the Forestry Commission thinking about how the audience came upon that work and connecting to what the work they were doing on the site. So it wasn't just a 5-minute VR piece, it was like an hour-long experience too.
Thank you. I don't know if you had a thing, Hilary.
A little bit. Yeah, I think based on what I've just said, it has to be the ability for people to explore things that they're restricted from doing for whatever reason. So I think what we did, just touching on the question before about digital skills training, we did quite a lot of skills training with local housing residents, and we parked the materials because there was no value in sitting somebody down and showing them that here's a mouse, here's a keyboard, here's a screen, this is how you do email. That, you know, the beauty was in watching them engage with a Deep Purple video that they might have danced to in the 70s, I'm showing my age now, or somebody looking at holiday photos from a North Wales caravan park that they'd seen, you know, real simple engagement with digital that we often think, you know, everybody does that, but really that can be the way in for some people who've never used the internet before. They might want to look at pictures of Nick Berry when he was in Heartbeat. You know, we found that, and I think that's really quite wonderful to be working in that space.